Charles Kuralt had a talent for bringing humanity back to America. Despite his away in New York on Friday, the CBS newsman left behind his stories of road trips. The most dependable storyteller in America had a secret that would have ruined him. For 29 years, Charles Kuralt sent a lady $600,000 while his wife sat at home. As a pop, he signed letters, paid for education, and purchased acreage in Montana to non his offspring. While CBS viewers witnessed a man driving down quiet roads, he was leading two entirely different lives behind the scenes. Until the day he passed away, the truth remained secret. Then, a letter that appeared altered everything. Although Charles Kuralt was born in Wilmington, he wasn't actually reared there. Because it had a hospital, his mother, Ina, only went there to give birth. At James Walker Memorial Hospital, she gave birth to him on September 10, 1934. After that, she and her spouse Wallace returned to her parents' tobacco plantation in Onslow County with their infant. It was a 100-acre farm. It was there that young Charles spent his early years. There was no indoor plumbing, no electricity, and no sink. Using a gourd that hung on a nail, they sipped water from a porch pump. Wood stoves were the source of heat. Charles, though, was unconcerned. Using flour paste, he created newspaper kites. He made a joke about God being able to read the headlines when he wrapped them with tobacco string and released them so high above the barn. In addition, he made tiny Venus fly traps out of straw fragments and carved slingshots out of dogwood branches. He and his family continued to move. They were in North Carolina's Washington first. Next, Stedman. Atlanta comes next. After Wallace Kuralt was appointed head of the Mecklenburg County Department of Social Services, they finally made Charlotte their home in the middle of the 1940s. New things appeared in every place, and little Charles developed a radio obsession. At the age of 14, he began hosting a music show and commentating on minor league baseball games. Back in Charlotte on Ways Radio, he won a local writing competition that year for a sports narrative about a dog that interrupted a baseball game. He learned journalism from Manhattan while he was a student at Alexander Graham Junior High from 1945 to 1948. He contributed a piece to the school newspaper titled The Kaleidoscope. And then an amazing event occurred. Charles was 14 when he won the National Voice of Democracy competition in 1948. That year, only 4 people were the winners. He was given a $500 scholarship and was flown to the White House in Washington, D.C., where he met President Harry S. Truman. At Colonial Williamsburg, he also gave his famous speech while standing where Patrick Henry had said, "If this is treason, make the most of it." Charles later claimed that the same kind of fearless American spirit was what he wanted his speech to evoke. He was among the first winners in the nation, as the competition had only been around since 1946. Even before high school concluded, this moment demonstrated to the public his already exceptional talent. In Onslow County, he spent his summers working with his grandparents in tobacco fields. He would gather leaves when it was harvest time. They would be tied onto wooden poles to dry after being given to a person known as a stringer. Although they would hang them in wood barns, he truly enjoyed the 50-mile journeys to Kinston's tobacco market. He would travel with his grandma, Rena, after she loaded their wagon with cured tobacco and hitched up the mule. As they rode, she would tell him about bandits robbing farmers returning from the market. Wagons used to move with riflemen at the front because of this, she explained. Always keeping an eye out for imaginary bandits, Charles would act as though he was protecting them. His later TV storytelling was based on these recollections. He also seen things that most white kids missed. While attending all-white schools as a child in the segregated South, Charles was aware of the injustices facing black people. In Charlotte, police were frequently brutal. Officers hitting people in the streets were reported in the Charlotte Messenger, the local black newspaper. He witnessed much more inequity because his father worked as a social worker. All of this remained with Charles. Later in life, he never used television to preach politics, but he always made sure to share stories that gave voice to those who were frequently disregarded. That was his method of getting to his feet. At Central High School, he was more than just a regular student from 1948 to 1951. In the school, he was regarded as the most gifted writer. Even though he was already doing well, his classmates selected him the most likely to succeed in 1951. When he was 14, he worked as a radio host. In that year, he received $500, shook hands with a U.S. president, and won the Voice of Democracy contest. Today, that would be more over $5,000. Real reporters began to take notice of him because of how expertly he edited the school publications. In 1951, he started at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where he produced work that was astounding. Despite being a history major, he worked for a number of radio stations, such as WCHL and WNC. In addition to doing radio documentaries and maintaining his grades, he covered basketball and football games. By joining the St. Anthony Hall Literary Fraternity, he demonstrated that he was not only knowledgeable about news but also a critical thinker. The fact that he was able to do so many tasks at once astounded his peers. Without a hitch, he could compose an entire script, record it, and then go take a history test. He was just 19 years old in 1953 and had a part-time job at Charlotte's Way's Radio. This job wasn't at a college. Calling baseball games with the same fluid delivery that would later make him famous, he was working as a professional broadcaster. As if he were seated beside you in your living room, he spoke. Charles presented anecdotes, which people enjoyed, while others shouted out statistics. He was praised over the phone by the station. Despite the fact that he was still only a teenager, managers found him to be unique. A soothing voice that gave individuals the impression that they were being heard. And heard. In 1954, he was appointed editor of the student newspaper, the Daily Tar Heel. Additionally, he had no fears. Knowing that his irate editorials would offend a lot of people, he wrote them against racial segregation. A few referred to him as a communist. Publicly, state politicians made fun of him. Charles penned a sarcastic commentary when the university outlawed alcohol in fraternities, comparing it to a French crusade against wine and simply saying, "Pierre, meet Fred." In addition to reporting the news, he utilized wit to criticize authority. He received his degree in history from UNC in 1955. His family wished for him to pursue a legal education. That would have been the more secure option, but Charles had recently received a national prize for his radio broadcast about the history of North Carolina. Professionals nationwide took attention because it was so good. He rejected law school to pursue journalism full-time, shocking his professors. The risk was high. His folks weren't wealthy. However, CBS News hired him in 1957, 2 years later. He was only 23, making him the network's youngest correspondent ever. Charles Kuralt relocated to the CBS offices in New York in 1959. It felt to him like a dream. The same building was where his childhood hero, Edward R. Murrow, worked. Within a week of substituting for a writer on Murrow's nightly show, Kuralt was abruptly promoted to the television news staff. Fresh on-air talent was desperately needed by CBS. Kuralt himself acknowledged it years later. "They really needed on-the-air people," he remarked. Television news was new and dangerous at the time. In addition to writing short stories on American life, he worked on initiatives such as Dimensions on Health. Writing quick, understandable radio segments in the middle of the night was part of his job. He learned how to tell powerful stories fast under tremendous strain, which would influence his entire career. Something unexpected occurred by 1960. Kuralt, who was only 25 years old, was the inaugural host of the Eyewitness to History primetime series. He swiftly rose to prominence as the face of the show's new aesthetic. He assisted in covering the momentous debates between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. That was the moment that forever altered television. There were a startling 77 million viewers of those debates. At the time, over 60% of American adults were in that category. He was hailed by a prominent magazine named Variety, which said he was youthful, attractive, and exuded confidence and authority. He didn't appear phony or theatrical. He inspired confidence in others. His coverage of one of the most significant political events in American history while still learning how to do television made it even more amazing. CBS presented him with an even greater challenge in 1961. As their principal correspondent for Latin America, they dispatched him to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. He was in his 20s at the time. He was tasked with covering 23 nations. There were actual risks. Street riots, revolutions, and a persistent sense of panic were all present. An injury or worse could result from one poor move. Reports from locations where governments were collapsing were his responsibility. And there were reports of violence every day. He held that position until October 1962, just as the Cuban Missile Crisis was making the entire region even more unstable. He demonstrated his ability to manage pandemonium with composure in each report he returned. His role as a reporter was evolving. He was turning into a reliable person. In 1964, when he returned to the United States, the nation was rapidly changing. There were civil rights movements, conflict, and protests. In the center of it all was Kuralt. His reporting from Vietnam was horrifying. One assignment, he recalled, included him and his crew following a troop of Vietnamese rangers. There was an ambush. According to him, half of the group we were with were dead. We were quite fortunate to escape death. He created a Vietnam-themed Christmas program in 1965. One tragic scene included a soldier being shot directly in front of the camera. He also visited Selma, Alabama, where the civil rights marches were taking place. People were moved by his subdued interviewing style, which caused them to pause and reflect. Despite only being in his 30s, he was already documenting the decade's most heartbreaking and perilous moments. By 1967, Kuralt was worn out. He was fed up with competing with other reporters and attempting to get huge scoops before others did. Something different was what he desired. He informed CBS officials that he had to leave the office. His thoughts seemed odd. How about there be no duties at all, he suggested. What about traveling the Great American Highway for 3 months to see what I could see? Travels with Charlie, a book by John Steinbeck, served as his inspiration. The concept wasn't taken seriously by CBS at first. It seemed to them like a joke. One executive, however, gave him a chance. Maintaining minimal expenses was the only need. Kuralt set off in a leased mobile home with cameraman Isidore Bleckman in the fall of 1967. It was hardly a showy affair. The chairs were filthy. Their primary food sources were peanut butter and crackers, while the refrigerator had just Coke and alcohol. Each morning, they selected a town approximately 100 miles distant by consulting a map. They then took to the road. That little notion turned into a landmark. Over the years, they drove over 1 million miles in 6 different mobile homes. Throughout 48 states, they produced 500 segments. Additionally, Kuralt discovered something most news programs had overlooked with every tale: meaning, kindness, and honesty in the lives of regular people. On October 27, 1967, the first episode of On the Road was shown. George and June Butler, a couple who produced maple syrup near Jacksonville, Vermont, were the subject of the story. George made a lovely statement on video. Color and sound are both possible, he argued, but smell is not. Furthermore, the scent is one thing. Perhaps the sap is osmotically entering your system. It wasn't for financial gain. As he put it, it's the true delight of being in the forest. The entire series was shaped by that story. It was friendly, straightforward, and honest. It won over the hearts of the viewers. They had already covered 50,000 kilometers by 1968. One particularly memorable experience was speaking with a 99-year-old bricklayer in Iowa. He was still at work. The article caused a spike in the ratings. People found it hard to believe. Kuralt continued to meet such folks. The jogger he interviewed was 104 years old. The world's largest ball of string was owned by a woman, while a man lived in a house constructed out of beer bottles. They found mountain climbers, jugglers, wrestlers, police officers, tattoo artists, Gandhi dancers, sheep shearers, bagel bakers, horseshoe players, rodeo riders, sorghum producers, seashell collectors, and more, he once claimed. It seemed like a silent celebration of life in every story. With the addition of producer Shed Northshield in 1970,
the program underwent a permanent transformation.
They could now edit their film while traveling rather than returning to New York thanks to the mobile editing tools he carried. It maintained the flow of the show while saving money and time.
It was an important discovery.
They were able to go further and remain out later while still meeting CBS deadlines. This contributed to On the Road's continued expansion. And it gave Kuralt a sense of freedom. It's possible that the series would have finished considerably sooner without such update.
One of Kuralt's most potent portions was then produced in 1972.
It was about old hobos in California traveling by rail. These men had been sleeping in camps and traveling by rail for decades, living apart from society. While most people had forgotten them, Kuralt remembered them. He listened to them, showed them respect, and spent time with them. He was honored with an Emmy for that article. He was aware that the hobo way of life was becoming extinct.
Highways were replacing that environment, and it was rapidly disappearing.
But their tales were preserved because to Kuralt.
Charles Kuralt's On the Road reached a genuinely remarkable level in the 1970s.
Even though he had already been traversing America, everything came together during these years. He filmed more than 600 short stories with his little crew. People nationwide halted their activities to observe. These tranquil periods during a period of turmoil, riots, rallies, and conflict were even dubbed 2-minute ceasefires by Time magazine. Kuralt displayed a different message from the rest of the news, which was one of violence and division.
He demonstrated. His expression was hopeful. He avoided using the highways.
They were something he detested. Highways, he once remarked, allow you to go from coast to coast without seeing anything. That's why he chose the back roads. 6 motor homes were worn out by his more than 1 million miles of travel. He discovered the true essence of America, and people adored him for it.
He received his second Peabody Award for this work in 1975.
He was referred to as a bicentennial historian, and commended him for capturing the narratives of the American people and landscape. In 1974, one story in particular caught our attention.
It was about Ira Perkins, a teacher in a rural school in Montana.
For 53 years, he had been a teacher at that same small schoolhouse. He began in 1933, when he was earning only $60 a month, during the Great Depression. It was just $420 for the entire year. But he stayed.
Even his first students' grandkids were taught by him. He
would dance to wake the children and teach them manners every morning. Math was taught in one grade while history was taught in another in that one-room school.
It was easy, yet effective.
All of that was quietly respected by Kuralt.
He started something considerably larger in 1975. A wagon train was celebrating America's 200th birthday by making its way from Valley Forge to California. Kuralt went to join them. The show was renamed On the Road to 76.
He said he will travel to every state. There was more to it than a tale. He accompanied them on their rides, lived with them, and chronicled everything. He was awarded another prize by the Peabody judges, claiming that he demonstrated that the spirit of the pioneers endured. They admired his ability to bring forgotten places back to life and his ability to find profound meaning in little villages. A blind guy who attempted to climb Mount McKinley was the subject of one of his stories from 1976.
Now known as Denali, that mountain is the highest in North America.
Despite his inability to see, the man climbed. The entire nation witnessed Kuralt's example of courage.
They were unable to quit observing.
He claimed that heroes did not exist in politics or on cinema screens.
We lived next door to them. Many additional episodes were modeled after that one.
It was about the unsung strength of common people, perseverance, and optimism.
In 1977, On the Road celebrated its 10th birthday.
To commemorate, Kuralt displayed something as basic as barbershops in tiny towns.
But everything was discussed in those settings: heartbreak, politics, and sports.
It went beyond a simple haircut. It served as a gathering spot. In the same year, he disclosed that he had only requested 3 months when he first gave CBS the concept. No assigned articles, no grand goal, simply 3 months of traveling. It wasn't easy, but in the end, he did it for 25 years. The RVs malfunctioned. He slept in cramped, chilly quarters. The roadways had no signs. Nevertheless, he continued. When he looked at endangered animals in 1979, he saw something different. On January 28, 1979, Kuralt stood in the chilly Cobb's Cook Bay, Maine, on the inaugural CBS Sunday morning broadcast. Bring up bald eagles. Stated that if you are fortunate and at the correct place, you will one day glance up and see an eagle perched on a wing. It's an eye-stopping sight. There weren't many left. That line stuck in people's minds. It was more than nature. It was a call to action, a warning to be more mindful of the environment. Alaska had more bald eagles than any other state at the time, at 30,000. Kuralt clarified why that was important. The following year, 1979, he began a new project. He got a new post at CBS. He would broadcast Sunday morning from a studio in New York. He didn't abandon the road, though, even then. To host the show, he continued to travel throughout the week and returned by plane on the weekends. For 9 more years, he lived like way. Only in 1988 did he give up traveling. He had suffered because of it. He had been in motion all day for 21 years. In 1985, there were speculations that he performed in China. It isn't accurate. He did, however, chronicle the 1989 protests for democracy in China. That was risky. Despite his reputation as a gentle storyteller, Kuralt didn't back down from a challenge. He and Ralph Plastid had accompanied an expedition to the North Pole back in 1967. In Tandies, they encountered freezing conditions as low as 40 degrees and utilized snowmobiles. Even the Congo Revolution was covered by him in the 1960s. He later acknowledged, however, that he had become weary of the rivalry between reporters. That's why he decided to take the road. He released his autobiography, A Life on the Road, in 1990. It achieved bestseller status. It was more than a book of pleasant tales, though. It was sincere. He described how the cameras froze and the temperature plummeted to 60 degrees while he was filming the Northern Lights in Alaska, almost killing him. He described the loneliness of the trip. He admitted that he occasionally went weeks without having a meaningful conversation. He spent 5 days in the hospital after contracting food sickness in Louisiana. He almost got bitten by a rattlesnake in Arizona once more. Sometimes he would stop to yell at the sky, he even acknowledged. He was affected by it. It was not always an easy route. Sunday morning, however, flourished in spite of everything. In 1979, 1982, and later, it took home 3 Peabody Awards under his direction. The show's 90-second nature film was one of its most well-known segments. Just the seasons changing, no words. It took 3 to 5 days to film each one. In order to catch the ideal lighting or animal movement, the crew would occasionally wait for hours. Kuralt desired perfection. He would re-record voiceovers up to 12 times if he did not like a word. He rejected dozens of stories every week and picked every single one personally. On Sundays, many began to get up early just to watch. By the beginning of the 1990s, more than 6 million Americans were watching. As of April 3, 1994, he was retired. He was just 59. In 1996, he was not awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom, despite the expectations of many. However, he was given additional honors. Both the Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism and his induction into the Television Hall of Fame were bestowed upon him. He didn't go slowly. 3 times a week, he debuted a new series called An American Moment that featured short pieces. He also hosted I Remember, a show that examines significant historical events. Charles Kuralt married Suzanne Patty Baird on June 1, 1962, while standing in a courtroom at New York City Hall. Only 1 minute was spent on the entire event. Anyone watching thought it was a quick and easy wedding between a bright lawyer and a budding journalist. The PT never realized that this would be the start of a 35-year falsehood. Charles and Sari Guthrie, his college sweetheart whom he married in 1954, had divorced just 2 years prior.
He committed to starting a life on Manhattan's Upper East Side with PT.
But in 6 years, everything would start to fall apart, though not in a way she could see. Patricia Shannon was the lady Kuralt met in Reno, Nevada, in 1968.
Patricia was a well-known community volunteer and a divorced mother of 3.
Following the passing of Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., tensions were high nationwide that summer. Kuralt had recently begun his On the Road series at CBS, which he used as an excuse to travel frequently.
Something happened when he laid eyes on Patricia.
After delivering 3 dozen roses to her door, he took her out to dinner. They chatted in a motel lounge all night long.
That was the beginning of a 29-year covert relationship. Patricia was divorced by 1969 with Charles Kuralt's assistance.
To get them far enough away, he temporarily relocated her and her kids to New York before relocating them to Colorado. In the same year, he began to send her money.
Lots of it.
In the ensuing decade, he gave her roughly $600,000. That is now worth more than $4 million. He paid for her studies in London, helped her launch a landscaping company, and purchased her San Francisco homes. Kuralt was surreptitiously raising a second family across the nation while his legal wife spent her time in New York managing money and social affairs. Kuralt purchased 20 acres of land in Montana in 1970. The Big Hole River is nearby. There, he constructed a cabin with Patricia. Despite telling Petey it was only a fishing spot, he would go missing for weeks every September.
With Patricia, not alone.
He even spent $180,000 renovating a nearby old schoolhouse into a writing office where he intended to retire with her. Later on, he increased the land size to 90 acres. It was not merely a covert retreat.
A whole second life was involved. By 1971, as a pop, he was signing letters to Patricia's children.
He sent her daughter to college, taught her to drive, and gave her son his first baseball glove.
He treated them like his own children, went to school, and took vacations. He visited every 2 to 3 weeks and spoke to Patricia virtually every night. Even at the height of his professional activity.
CBS viewers witnessed a gentle, grounded storyteller, but behind the scenes, he was living a lie that permeated every aspect of his life.
But he didn't end there.
He began bringing Patricia's son to political conventions and CBS assignments in the 1980s. Like a son, he prided himself on him. While he was working hard, his real wife was by herself in New York. He even gave Patricia a $50,000 cottage in Ireland at one point as a covert present to help sustain the life he had created with her.
Kuralt was dying of lupus in a New York hospital in June 1997. He was hardly able to walk. He wrote Patricia a letter 16 days prior to his death, stating, "I'll have the lawyer visit the hospital to make sure you inherit the rest of the place in NT." It was his final effort to safeguard the things he had created with her, if that is any indication. He had surreptitiously paid her $80,000 to purchase 20 acres of the property 3 months prior, feigning a normal sale. But he was being explicit now. He desired to give the entire Montana property to her. In 1997, Kuralt passed away on July 4. Patricia Shannon carried the letter when she arrived at his funeral. It was a moment that broke everything. Despite being his wife for 35 years, PT was unaware. That's when she found out her husband had a second family. He had sent their children to school, bought them land, given them hundreds of thousands of dollars, and spent holidays with them while she sat at home in the dark. Patricia's letter would become the focal point of a court case that would alter the course of history. Now valued at over $600,000, the Montana property became the subject of a vicious legal battle. In October 1999, Kuralt lost Petey, and his daughters from his first marriage joined the fight. According to Shannon's testimony in court, Charles had treated her children as his own. One Christmas, he gave her a poem, which she even read. She was promised a sweater, a suit, pearls, and him. "My life" was the last words spoken. Together with the letter, that poem was used as proof. On March 22, 2000, the Montana Supreme Court decided in her favor.
Nearly $1 million was lost overall because the estate had to pay $350,000 in taxes on land they no longer owned. Nothing was left of that property for Kuralt's daughters, and their perception of the man they believed to be their friend was damaged.
And then the last blow.
Patricia Shannon revealed everything in her 2002 memoir, Charles and Me. She talked about Charles taking her son on CBS travels across the nation, the poems, the phone conversations, and the travels. She told how he purchased an Irish cottage for her and provided decades of spending money to her. She disclosed that Kuralt had deceived not only his spouse but the entire world. America's trusted truth-teller had lived the greatest lie of all.
Oh no.